A moment you have ever seen. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half his order on the counter and started fuming off, anticipating his next move. I went back to my original post that night as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12+ hour days 6 days a week and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking shh. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is effed up and the department manager was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bee my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only could fire him. I said right? He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an a-hole. When I was in high school I worked at Popular Warehouse Club selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I'd make a good salesman. So my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers, nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that and insisted that I needed to go fold clothes for a while, as in half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power trip-in shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager clothes behind. Store manager slaps his stack of green bar paper, this was a while ago, down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not." At this point, it would be more cost effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution? The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. When an unhappy client threatens to go hire a better lawyer, they don't seem to get that this isn't a threat when they aren't paying me. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I check their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1-2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threaten to never use the service again, Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window. So the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years, putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure our store was set to be closed, and for the last month the store was sold to liquidation company, meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. I worked at a movie theater and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just couldn't see and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said get the F out and the customers went, you can't say that. This isn't your theater. We're customers. Mall security guy promptly said this is my mall, and I can do whatever the F I want. New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He didn't have a pass card yet and a lower level employee told him that he can't enter without pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in. But the worker insisted, show me the pass card, or you're not entering. Few days later this worker got a bonus. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. My job right before my current one. Property manager, the owner was an absolute prick. He was heartless and rude and racist and I loathed him. I hated every day going into that job, but I needed the money. I was applying daily to my dream company in hopes that eventually I'd be accepted. In the meantime, every time I complained or mentioned something to my supervisor I was told to shut up and get on with it. He was paying me too much to have opinions. 3 years after, we were a small office and the receptionist and assistant prop managers had quit. I finally got accepted into my dream company and happily put in my 2-week notice. In desperation, he offered me more money, a higher position, better benefits, which were laughable. When I said no, he asked why. I have never felt more gleeful than the moment of when I said I don't know. I'm not paid to have opinions here. That was a year ago and even now the look on his stupid old face gives me joy to this day. When my manager at McDonald's gets into fights with all the aggressive toxic customers and booting them out the store by calling them all security if they refuse to leave. When I was still a child I saw how abusive my grandparents were to my parents when they used to stay in their house during their early years of marriage when they were broke. They are forced to accept the abuse and swallow their pride knowing that they are still indebted to them and had nowhere to go. Once they have enough money to leave my grandparents they moved to a small rented house. My grandparents came for an unannounced visit and berated my dad for living in such a shanty house and how ungrateful he was for leaving their home. My dad was silent until they start blaming my mother for being a wife that brought bad luck to my dad and how she poisons him into moving to a new home. My dad wasn't having any of their bile anymore and kicked them out. They stopped talking until my grandfather was dying of leukemia. My mom was the one who persuaded my dad to see him before he passed. I taught my 6th grade students about democratic processes, and we ran a simulation. Without fail, every one of my classes tried to impeach me. When my Steifu can't douche. 15 years ago, I worked for a company in Germany that was bought by a large US company. One of the first actions was a mandatory HR meeting. They used their US PowerPoint deck and guided us through the rules regulations, although directed by our local HR team to not do that. Here are some of the highlights. We are not allowed to accept tickets for the Super Bowl. Utterly confusion. 90% of the people had never heard of the Super Bowl. A discussion about why we would want to watch that anyways. started. We are not allowed to have relationship with anybody from a supplier or within the company. Uproar in the room. This is against the German constitution. What you do in your free time is none of their business. The discussion gets heated. Everybody is discussing. The Americans on the line are very confused why. The head of QA finally gets up and shouts, "If I love that woman, nobody will prevent me from dating her." People signed the sheet that they participated and read and understood the presentation with reservations. People start discussing where to sign up for legal expenses insurance. HR refrained from that day from having mandatory global HR meetings. Management tried a couple of other stuff at will employment. Against the law. Everybody has a contract. Cutting vacation. Against the law. Canceling bank holidays. Against the law. Make people work on vacation days. Guess what? Against the law. And a couple more. It was a prime example of cultural ignorance and incredible funny. Had an old boss who was a complete and total bastard. He was actually my boss and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss. But he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him and he just starts unloading cursing, name calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the F I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and I'll gladly take that money if I'm busy being yelled at. I'm not busy with anything else. Seem to work. I work at a hotel. It's high end, so we often take the approach of just appeasing guests no matter what. So I frequently have to bite my tongue. However, we have a very desirable parking lot, and when people poach it we boot them. I love enforcing these, because I don't have to bite my tongue or apologize, as they aren't guests. My favorite one was this. Girl parks, and walks to neighbor hotel. Our GM happens to be in the lot, and says, "Hey, just for your information, this is parking for X hotel, not Z hotel." She proceeds to say "F you," flips him off, and walks into neighbor hotel. GM calls me and tells me. I giggle, grab the boot and slap it on her car. She comes back screaming and ranting. I tell her the cost is $200. She calls the police. The police ask, "Is this a private lot?" "Yes." "Okay, then pay them." She refuses to pay and storms off. I get a call requesting the manager. I speak with them. It's the girl's mom. She is trying to say, "Oh, my daughter didn't know. She was for a job interview, yada yada." I let her go on, and when she finally stops making excuses, I tell her that her daughter flipped off the GM, and there is no way the boot is coming off without payment. On top of that, I tell her when she pays she better not come in swearing or yelling, or the price goes up to $300. She hangs up. The daughter comes back and silently hands me $200, with a look of rage on her face. I've never been so internally giggly before. One of my jobs is in a hotel restaurant bar. A guest came into the bar after having been refused service at our sister hotel down the road. He was very drunk and had been rude, abusive and threatening to the staff. He insisted we serve him as he was a guest, but we'd already been phoned by our sister hotel so they could let us know what the situation was. We refused, but offered him some water and suggested he go up to his room. He then went on about how he had nearly bought our hotel and that he was practically our boss, so we should serve him or he'd have us fired. We refused. He told us he was a very rich man and would tip us hundreds of pounds if we served him. We refused. He was getting abusive at this point, so we again suggested he have some water and head up to his room. He went on to tell us that his brother was the mayor so we should serve him. We refused and told him he should go on up to his room yet again. He then said he was going to the pub across the street, but all the pubs restaurants in our town have a barred from them all policy. We telephoned the other pubs to inform them of the situation. Many of them got back to us and said they had been offered money and threatened with losing their jobs, and also told the story of the mayor. All of the pubs stuck to their guns and refused to serve him. Eventually, he came back to the hotel and went to his room. New director decides admin should hold a meeting at noon MF in the nurses' lunchroom and bar them from entering during that time. Defines it in a group text as a quick win. My response: Please help me to understand how this is beneficial to remove the nurses from their lunchroom during lunch break. No response. His peers and higher ups in on the text. He is then moved to the quality department. Screwed up on so many levels. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching his consultants, which, in and of itself, is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to our office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the F he was doing here. He started in on me again and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. I did the all hand on his back, point to the door, universal symbol for leave, or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. I used to work at a few subways. Thing is, the owner inherited them when she already had a busy and lucrative career elsewhere. She mainly held onto them to employ immigrant family members, I think. One time, she was in the back when she heard me interact with an angry customer. Afterward, she came out and said, "You know you don't have to take sh like that. I trust you. You can use your judgment and just toss anybody out who talks to you like that." After that I wouldn't take any sh from anybody. Slightest hint of back talk to your sandwich artist, and you were out on your A. Still hungry. It was so much fun. Let me speak to your manager. No. Get out. I'm going to call and complain. Oh, I'm terrified. Go nuts. But you can't call from in here, because you're trespassing now. The sheer indignance of an entitled customer when you don't bow and scrape before them is really something to behold. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working, again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy as part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. I worked at a Walmart as a cashier, and the assistant manager there was a dick. He would insult everybody working there and forced us sometimes to do work above our pay grade. 6 months later me and him got transferred to another Walmart that was just built and they needed to pick a manager and assistant manager. Some random got manager, but I got assistant manager. I guess all the complaints on the assistant manager basically gave him a demotion. So one day he was ordering the other cashiers around, then I pulled him to the side and told him that if he kept pulling the same sh around he would be out of here. I haven't heard anything from him since. A co-worker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas and he was able to upgrade to a first class seat. We had this B sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs. And she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class, and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally he tells her she has to go back to her seat, or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete A of herself in front of the whole first class cabin. Not sure if it fits, but during an insanely busy weekend before Christmas, a Karen was complaining to every associate about how messy our store was. The manager had relieved the girl at the fitting room and was helping to hang stuff. Karen pulled her crap and was trying to make a point that we were messy and a horrible place to shop. This manager told her roughly, "Mom, we're messy at the moment because we're a popular store, and the biggest reason we're messy is because of women like you who can't be bothered to pick up after themselves. It's not the associates making the mess, it's people like you. Your type have us outnumbered." First time I actually witnessed someone deflate. My parents were yelling at me and then my grandpa walks over and tells them both to sit the F down. They both shut the F up and sit their A down on the couch. It was by far the most powerful thing I've ever seen him do. Mayo. We had an our lady who was extremely power hungry. She is walking around with the president of the company who flew in from Japan. She rushes him to the warehouse. Just spits out, "Oh, these are the warehouse guys, we don't have to stop and talk to them." He stops, walks over and starts talking to me about my last vacation. How buying my house went. You could just see her fuming behind him as we talked for almost 45 minutes. I've had multiple meetings with him, we knew each other really well. I don't think he liked her and drug it out on purpose, but I was thrilled to see her just standing there bored as hell. In my first apartment, my parents came to visit, and I said F when I hit my head on the open door of the freezer while standing up from grabbing something from the fridge. My mother said, "You can't talk like that in my home," and stop mid-sentence. I have one that crosses with "I don't work here lady" a bit. I have a job, but I will still do interviews every couple years. This means the script is flipped a bit. They have to convince me to work there. Anyway, I got the town early, so I stopped at a bakery to get something to eat. The woman went in the back to get it, and this squat toad of a woman walks in, yells at me to get her order, and then yells at me again for not getting up right away to serve her. When I point out that I do not in fact work there, she goes off me about how important she is, etc. We can skip the play-by-play. I go the interview, head of it, and the toad woman walks in. She has this evil grin on her face. I stop everything. I point at the toad woman and I say something like, "I have seen how your management treats people, and I have no interest in working for you," and I take my resume out his hands and walk out. The look on her face was priceless. Oh, and he had walked in with a print of a resume, so I took his copy. Felt great to do.